It was a live morning broadcast of The View, the studio buzzing with its usual energy. Cameras glided smoothly, audience members clapped on cue, and the bright studio lights reflected off the glossy desk where the hosts sat. Everything looked perfectly controlled, rehearsed, and familiar. But behind the smiles, something unusual was about to unfold, something no one in the control room had fully anticipated. The guest that morning was Harrison Ford, the legendary Hollywood actor known for his calm, reserved personality and sharp, no-nonsense attitude. He had come to promote a fictional upcoming film, a survival drama set in extreme wilderness conditions. The audience had been excited all week for his appearance. Across from him sat Joy Behar, one of the show's most outspoken voices, known for her humor, directness, and willingness to challenge any guest regardless of fame. At first, everything went smoothly. Joy welcomed him warmly, joking about how he always seemed, like a man who could survive anything, from crashing planes in movies to fighting aliens in space. Harrison gave a small smile, nodding politely, his voice steady as he responded with short, thoughtful answers. The audience laughed, enjoying the light exchange. But then the conversation shifted. Joy leaned forward slightly, flipping through her notes. "You've played so many action heroes," she said. "But some critics say these roles promote unrealistic masculinity. They say it sends the message that problems are solved with violence rather than communication. What do you think about that?" A subtle shift in the room's energy followed. The audience quieted slightly, sensing the tone had changed. Harrison paused for a moment, looking at Joy with a calm but more serious expression. "Well," he said slowly, "I think people sometimes confuse storytelling with instruction. Movies aren't rule books. They're reflections of conflict, survival, and human nature." Joy nodded, but didn't let it settle. "Sure, but don't you think actors of your influence have a responsibility? Millions of people watch you. Doesn't that shape culture whether you intend it or not?" Harrison leaned back in his chair, hands folded. "Responsibility is a broad word," he replied. "I think the responsibility is to tell honest stories. Audiences are smart enough to understand the difference between fiction and reality." The audience clapped lightly, but Joy raised an eyebrow. There was a spark now, a subtle tension that the cameras immediately picked up. "Still," she said, "you can't ignore the impact. Some young people might see these characters and think aggression is the answer." Harrison exhaled softly, his tone still controlled but firmer now. "If someone takes a fictional character as a life manual, that's not on the actor. That's a larger societal issue." The studio went quiet again. Even the background music faded slightly under the control room's adjustment. Joy smiled, but it wasn't her usual playful smile anymore. "So you're saying artists have zero responsibility?" she asked. "I'm saying," Harrison replied, "that blaming storytelling for how people interpret it is too simple." The audience reacted with mixed murmurs. Some clapped, some stayed silent. The tension was now visible on camera. Joy shifted in her seat, crossing her arms. "That sounds like avoiding accountability," she said. "Hollywood has a long history of shaping opinions. You can't just wash your hands of that." Harrison's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger but in concentration. He chose his words carefully, but his tone carried weight now. "I'm not washing my hands of anything," he said. "I'm saying adults should engage with media critically. If we assume audiences can't do that, then we have a bigger problem than movies." A ripple of applause broke out, louder this time. The audience seemed divided but engaged. The director in the control room signaled to keep rolling. This was becoming television gold. Joy, however, leaned in further, her voice sharpening just slightly. "But isn't that a bit dismissive? You're essentially saying if people misinterpret messages, it's their fault. That feels a little disconnected." At this point, Harrison shifted in his chair, his patience visibly thinning, not aggressively, but with a quiet intensity. He had been in countless interviews, faced tough questions before, but something about the framing of the conversation was starting to irritate him. "I think what's disconnected," he said carefully, "is the idea that entertainment should be held responsible for every interpretation made by every viewer." The audience reacted again, louder this time. The studio energy was now electric. Joy gave a short laugh, shaking her head. "I just think that's a very convenient position for Hollywood to take." There was a brief silence. Harrison looked at her directly now. The calmness was still there, but so was firmness. "It's not a convenient position," he said. "It's a realistic one." The room felt like it had tightened. Even the other hosts glanced between them. Sensing the exchange had gone beyond casual debate, Joy opened her mouth to respond, but Harrison continued, his voice steady but more pointed. "At some point," he said, "we have to trust audiences to think for themselves. Otherwise, we're not talking about art anymore, we're talking about control." A wave of applause broke out from part of the audience. The energy split sharply, some clapping loudly, others unsure whether to react. Joy leaned back in her chair, her expression shifting from debate mode to something more reflective, but still defensive. She looked toward the audience, then back at Harrison. "Well," she said, exhaling, "I guess we'll just have to agree to disagree." But the moment wasn't over yet. Harrison nodded slightly, but added one final thought, calmly but firmly. "That's usually where honest conversations end anyway." The tone in his voice wasn't hostile, but it carried finality, a kind of emotional closure that didn't invite further argument. For a second, Joy didn't respond. The studio felt suspended in silence, as if everyone was waiting for her next line. Then she smiled tightly, adjusted her microphone, and gave a small nod toward the production crew. "We'll be right back after the break," she said, her professional tone returning. But the cameras caught it, the brief hesitation, the shift in her energy. As the show cut to commercial, Joy leaned slightly away from the desk, removing one hand from the table as if distancing herself from the moment. Behind the scenes, producers were already whispering, realizing they had just witnessed one of the most intense live exchanges of the season. Harrison simply sat back, calm again, expression unreadable, as the red light above the camera finally blinked off.